because I watched your speech last night, and this is the question I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
Nice.
you spoke at the DNC this week. You spoke about your relationship with the vice president. How did she influence you?
Oh my gosh. Well, when I met her in 2010, she offered to help, and she's never stopped helping. That was 2010. I went out to California. She actually established a number of stakeholders for the Back on Track program and allowed me to meet with them. Um, she has since then helped me when I ran for county executive. We met, and she actually sat and talked through issues before that race. She's talked with me during the Senate race, and so she has been just a constant source of mentoring and friendship. She's a role model for me and for so many other women across the country who watch her. She's a person who is deeply principled. And I just really have learned a lot in watching her. I'll tell you, for example, I went to California when she was running for Senate. And she said, the weekend before my primary, come out and ride the tour bus with me, my campaign bus. And so I said, okay. I went out to California, rode the bus with her and her husband. And at the time, Mayor Bass was on the bus as well. That entire bus ride, you would think a person the weekend before their primary would be talking about the race and maybe even talking about themselves. Never. I've never had a discussion where she spoke about herself. She's always asking how you're doing, asking about various issues, how you're addressing the issue. But she's just a really excellent leader, really excellent.
So a political question for you. There's no doubt that the overturning of Roe v. Wade became such a political hot topic and really energized a lot of the Democratic base, even those that maybe didn't consider themselves Democratic. But do you think that it's also helped women to get into office, whatever that may be, local, state, or even national?
I think it's become a huge issue, but not just for women. Believe it or not, as I'm out and about talking in Maryland to people, there are a good number of men, fathers who are very concerned about the way that the overturning of Roe affects their daughters, grandfathers, because what they recognize is that the Republican Party has now created not just a policy, it's a platform issue to roll back the rights and freedoms of women. We think about contraception, where this Senate just recently had the opportunity to codify in federal law a woman's right to access contraception. The Republicans in the Senate voted no. The same was true for IVF. And so this issue is one that has galvanized women and men who recognize that they want for themselves, for their daughters and granddaughters and wives, to have reproductive choices, to have control over their body.
And that's certainly true. And as a man, I feel comfortable saying it does not impact me directly as much as a woman. And so I just want to re-ask the question, do you think it has helped to really open the eyes of people and encourage, if not embrace, women taking office to be a part of then the political solution, or at least hope of a political solution?
I think it does. I think there are a number of people who feel betrayed by what the Supreme Court did in overturning Roe, because we heard from the Supreme Court justices during their confirmation hearings that they believed that Roe was well-settled law. I think that they felt that they could trust Donald Trump and his justices, and I think a number of people feel betrayed after Roe and want to make sure that they are electing elected officials who will not roll back the rights of women.
I want to ask you about your race and closely watch, because it could potentially decide the balance of power in the Senate. Your opponent, obviously, two-term Republican Governor Larry Hogan. He's an interesting Republican in a way because he's not a Trump guy. He's won statewide twice as a Republican in that state, and it seemed as a tough opponent. How do you plan to beat him?
Well, let me just say, you said he's not a Trump guy. The fact is, right after Roe was overturned in 2022, Hogan said, quote, Trump deserves a lot of credit for the excellent Supreme Court choices that he made, that he appointed.
I should have paraphrased that, because he has said he is not a Trump guy and aligned himself with Trump. Go ahead.
But he praised him for his selection of Supreme Court justices, for his tax policies, and for other work that he'd done. He's also a person who was handpicked by Mitch McConnell to run for Senate. So he's not the independent person that he portrays himself to be, because he had said for months and months he had no interest whatsoever in running for Senate. But when he was invited into the race by Mitch McConnell, he accepted. And we know that he has a record that is very consistent with what we have seen of Republicans in the Senate, including his vetoing a really important abortion care legislation that would have expanded abortion care in the state of Maryland. And when his veto was overridden, he withheld the funding until the next governor came in. He's a governor who refused to sign important legislation that would have banned ghost guns in the state of Maryland. He vetoed legislation that would have created a waiting period for long guns. He's a person who didn't support paid and family medical leave. So many of the issues that we find are very consistent with the Republicans and Republican caucus are issues that he supports. And so we know that he would absolutely vote with the Republican caucus if he were allowed to have the majority in the Senate. He'd vote hook, line, and sinker because he said he would. He was questioned about whether he would vote with the Republican caucus. He said, absolutely, I am a lifelong Republican.
Do you feel like Harris being at the top of the ticket now helps you better in your race? Because the concern with Biden was the down ballot races.
Yeah, you know what? I think that what Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have done is to really energize a broad base of voters. And what's so beautiful about it is it's cross-generational. Everything from college students to older voters. So, for example, in Maryland, we have seen 15,000 new volunteers sign up to volunteer since July 21st alone. 15,000 new volunteers. And so people are really motivated and energized. And I think that the turnout is going to be really strong. And I think because of that, we're going to see large wins of Democratic candidates.
And there is certainly a historical significance if Kamala Harris wins the presidency. But if you yourself win the Senate race, you'll be the only African-American woman in the Senate. And less than 5 in history, none from Maryland, by the way, have ever been elected to the Senate. Does the weight of that historical significance weigh on you?
You know what? It doesn't. I have to say, I was the first woman to be elected prosecutor in my county. I was the first woman to be elected county executive in my county and the first black woman elected county executive in the state. But those are not the things that are significant. It is, and it was Kamala who said, it is not as significant to be the first at something, that it's more important to make sure that you're not the last, to do the kind of job, to deliver in such a way that you create opportunity for others to run. And I am most proud, in this moment, I'm not running to make history. I want to make a difference. And I believe that my experience, I believe that my lived experience and professional experience will help me make a difference for so many families in Maryland who lived lives like I do. I was raised in a working class family with a mother who was a receptionist her entire career, my father who was a newspaper distributor and a car salesman. I have come to understand what hard work looks like, and I know also what struggle is. And I will be there representing families who want what we all want for our families. True economic opportunity, access to health care, want to have affordable housing for our kids, the single best education we can offer. So those are the things that motivate me to run. And so I know there are many factors people consider, gender and other things, but mostly they consider the record and accomplishments and experience of the people they elect. And that is the reason I believe I will be elected.
I wonder if you feel like we're in a moment of change right now in terms of the viability of women of color candidates. And you mentioned going to visit Kamala Harris in California, and I cover politics in California, and I covered the Senate run where Barbara Lee was running for Dianne Feinstein's seat. And it was hard for her to gain traction statewide and raise money. And that was an issue for a lot of black female candidates, and it has been. And do you feel like with the ascension and the popularity and what we saw with this excitement around Kamala Harris in the past 3 weeks, that sort of an obstacle has been overcome in a way?
I think these are still tough races. I don't think Kamala Harris has been successful because of her race or gender. Mm-hmm. I think Kamala Harris is effective because she has a record as a district attorney, attorney general, senator, vice president, and now presidential candidate. She's eminently qualified. And when you think about it, we've only elected 2 black women in the history of our country to the Senate. Mm-hmm. If I were to be elected, and I hope that I will, and Lisa Blunt Rochester, we'd only be the 3rd and 4th ever elected in the history of our country. So we're making progress. We still have a lot of work to do. In fact, I'd be only the 2nd woman of any race elected to the Senate in Maryland. So we have not elected women. And in Maryland, we have a 10-person federal delegation with no women at all elected. So all 10 of our federal representatives, the 8 congressmen and 2 senators, are men. So it is the case that we
In 2024.
in 2024, we have no women at all in in our federal delegation. So it's exciting. I think that we're going to elect possibly three. Sarah Elfreth and April Delaney, I believe, will also be elected to Congress this year. So we will go from 0 to 3, which is going to be really great. And we'll just keep working because I think everyone should see themselves in the Senate, of every race, of every gender, and every background. And until and unless we do that, our country cannot be as strong as it should be, because I think everybody ought to be able to look in the Senate and in these bodies and see themselves.
Well, Executive Alsobrooks, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk a bit about the race in Maryland.
Thank you for having
Appreciate
me.
it.
Thank you so much.